Thank you for listening to another episode of Theology in Under 10 Minutes, a podcast about life and culture and theology. This is a podcast for busy people. This is a podcast for people who don't have much time to study. And here we are together studying. In this episode, I want to explore what it means to have an active faith. So let's begin, shall we? Let's just dive right into it. There are many things in life that if you allow it to, will paralyze you. There are things, situations, people, events that you come up against or confront you. They leave you standing or sitting and thinking, I'm not sure how to respond to this. What should my next move be? How should I move forward? And specifically, I want to talk about fear because fear paralyzes. When we encounter something, we're not sure how to move forward and we're fearful about the potential consequences that could happen if we move forward in the wrong way. Instead, what happens is we end up staying stuck. People in crisis often just don't know what to do. They experience a moment where they're frozen in place. So before the pandemic went down, I knew that this thing was coming. I watched the news of Wuhan being locked down a few months before the US, and I assumed that it would happen here too eventually. So I told my husband, maybe we should get some extra food or water just in case. Let's go to the grocery store. Let's get some things just in case that becomes difficult to do. And I had him buy extra toilet paper because I learned that people in Hong Kong were robbing trucks carrying toilet paper about 2-3 months before the toilet paper shortage came to America. So when the lockdowns actually started, even though I was prepared, I was still shocked. I kind of sat there for a while and I was like, what do I do? My productivity it came to a halt. We still had work. We had other things we were doing. I have children to take care of, but things just really slowed down dramatically because I was trying to pivot and reposition myself and I wasn't sure how to do it. So things just came to a standstill. A lot of stuff in my life came to a standstill. Fear can paralyze a person. I looked this up and I found out that there's this primitive neurological reason fear seems to freeze us, and people are metaphorically, but also quite literally frozen with fear. So whenever an animal's in an environment where there's an immediate threat, the animal's response is to stand as still and as quietly as it possibly can because it needs to pinpoint where the threat is coming from. If you're ever in a situation, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you hear a really loud noise in your home and you think it's an intruder, the first thing you do is you don't run to the noise. The first thing you do is stand still so you can figure out what to do next. That moment of paralyzation is how we get our bearings and figure out a plan. But the problem is when we don't move at all, but just stay stuck. So there's something really interesting that I noticed in Genesis 42 that corresponds with 2 Kings 7. And as a backdrop to what I'm about to read, I want you to keep in mind that there was a famine throughout the land at this time. So basically, in biblical times, in Genesis 42 and in 2 Kings 7, the grocery store shelves were clean. There was nothing there. And so it says in Genesis 42, 1-3, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there, buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. Now I want to read to you 2 Kings 7:3. It says, "Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, 'Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we'll die. If we stay here, we'll die. Let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die.'" So in both Genesis 42 and in 2 Kings 7, you see men who are not moving. They're just sitting there because they're afraid. They are fearful. They are frozen. But the opposite of fear is faith. Faith moves. Jacob tells his son, "Move, get up, go down to Egypt in faith that we might survive this thing." And they went to buy the grain in faith. And because of that act of faith, they actually end up learning that their brother is second in command to Pharaoh. And they end up living in Egypt in the best part, the most lush part of Egypt, not worried about famine ever again. Their best days were literally ahead of them. But they had to move in faith. But before they moved to Egypt, there was hesitation. Jacob was afraid to leave. But God spoke to him and said, "I will accompany you on this journey down to Egypt." He just needed to move in faith. The men with leprosy also were paralyzed and they were frozen with fear, but they made a decision to move in faith and not let fear keep them stuck in that place. The Bible says that at dusk they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. It says that when they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses, and a great army. So they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. In this instance, the men with leprosy moved in faith, and God moved ahead of them. When you move in faith, God goes with you, and he goes ahead of you. So don't let fear paralyze you. Move in faith, knowing that God is with you. God bless you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If this podcast is helping you, subscribe. Share it with someone you think might be helped by this message. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Shalom.